The street was unusually quiet that morning, the way it always is when the world is just starting to wake up. The air was crisp, the kind that clung to your skin, whispering that the warmth of your bed was waiting for you. And I needed it more than ever. After an exhausting 12-hour shift to the hospital, my body felt like it had been run out like an old dishcloth. All I wanted was to crawl into bed and let the world fade away. But the moment I turned the corner onto my street, my stomach tightened. My house was right there, but something was off. Something was wrong. There, parked in my driveway like it belonged, was a car I had never seen before. My first thought was that maybe a neighbor had a guest over who hadn't realized they were parked on private property. It was an honest mistake. Had to be. People make them all the time. No big deal. I let out a breath, forcing my irritation to settle. It wasn't worth losing sleep over. But still, it was my driveway, my house. And at that moment, my patience was hanging by a thread. Street parking was rare in my neighborhood, a luxury rather than a guarantee, and I had been looking forward to sliding into my usual spot without a second thought. Instead, I was forced to find a spot down the block. It wasn't a long walk, but after a full night of running from room to room, my legs felt like lead. I trudged back to my house, fatigue clawing at my limbs, but instead of collapsing into bed, I grabbed a pen and a sticky note from my kitchen counter. Hi there. Just a heads up. This is a private driveway. Please don't park here. Thanks. Satisfied with my good-natured approach, I stuck the note under the car's windshield wiper, then made my way inside. The couch was the first thing I saw, and without a second thought, I collapsed onto it. Little did I know that my driveway drama had only just begun. The next morning, I woke up still groggy from the night before, expecting the world to have righted itself. Maybe the driver had seen my note, apologized in their head, and moved their car before I even opened my eyes. But when I stepped outside, my stomach dropped. The car was still there. Worse, my polite note had been crumpled up and tossed into the bushes like a piece of garbage. A slow, simmering anger bubbled up inside me. This wasn't an innocent mistake anymore. Someone had seen my request and chosen to ignore it entirely. Okay, fine. I grabbed another sheet of paper and wrote a second note. This time, I wasn't as friendly. Private driveway. Do not park here. This is your final warning. I placed it back on the windshield, making sure it was wedged in tight. If they ignored me again, at least I knew it wouldn't be due to a lack of clarity. I told myself that was the end of it, that anyone with an ounce of common sense would get the message. I was wrong. Later that afternoon, after running some errands, I pulled onto my street, and there it was again, the car, sitting in my driveway like a stubborn weed that refused to be pulled. This wasn't just ignorance. It was deliberate. Who the hell did this person think they were? The next morning, I decided I wasn't going to leave another note. No, this time, I was going to confront them directly. I stood beside the offending vehicle, arms crossed, waiting. If the owner was nearby, I was going to have words. And sure enough, I didn't have to wait long. The front door of the house across the street swung open, and out she came. Karen. Even before she opened her mouth, I knew what kind of person she was. She had that haircut, the one that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager." She walked with an aggressive march, like the entire world owed her something, and she was here to collect. The moment her eyes landed on me, they narrowed. "What do you think you're doing by my car?" she demanded, her tone dripping with hostility. I blinked. Her car? Her car was in my driveway, and she was acting like I was the one in the wrong? "Your car," I said evenly, "is parked on my property. You've been here for days." I left 2 notes. Karen folded her arms, a smirk curling on her lips. "I only park here because the street parking sucks. It's not like you're using it all the time. What's the big deal?" I clenched my jaw. The big deal? Oh, let me count the ways. My elderly father relied on that driveway when he visited. My wife needed to park her car there after work. And me? I just wanted to be able to park in front of my own damn house without a problem. But I kept my word simple. "This is private property," I said. "You can't just use it because it's convenient for you. Please move your car and don't park here again." Karen let out a dramatic sigh, muttering something about selfish people before finally climbing into her car and pulling away. Victory, right? Wrong. 2 days passed. For the first time in what felt like forever, I pulled onto my street and saw my driveway empty. Relief washed over me. Maybe, just maybe, Karen had gotten the message. But that hope was short-lived. That evening, my wife called me from the driveway, her voice tense. I can't get out. That car is back again, parked right in front of the garage. I saw red. Furious, I stormed across the street and knocked on Karen's door. She opened it with an exaggerated sigh. "Oh, it's you." "Yes, it's me," I said, barely keeping my voice steady. "Move. Your car. Now." Karen rolled her eyes. "Look, I'm not going to argue with you every time I need to park somewhere. The driveway was empty. What's the harm?" I took a slow, steady breath. "The harm," I said, "is that this isn't public parking lot. It's my property. Move your car or I'll have it towed." She scoffed, muttering something under her breath. But she did move it. For now. A week passed without incident. I let my guard down. Then, on a Saturday morning, I walked outside to find not only Karen's car in my driveway, but a second car parked behind it. She had invited a friend to park there. That was it. I took out my phone, snapped a picture, and made a call. 30 minutes later, a tow truck pulled up. As I stood there watching both cars get hooked up and hauled away, I couldn't help but smile. Karen had messed with the wrong person. And little did she know, this was just the beginning of her nightmare. There's something deeply satisfying about watching justice unfold right before your eyes. As the tow truck hooked up Karen's car and her friend's vehicle, I stood with my arms crossed, feeling the weight of weeks of frustration finally lift off my shoulders. No more entitled excuses. No more passive-aggressive arguments. Just consequences. The tow truck driver gave me a small nod before pulling away. I nodded back, already relishing the moment when Karen would return to find her car missing. And sure enough, I didn't have to wait long. I had just settled onto my porch with a fresh cup of coffee when I saw her marching down the street, her phone glued to her ear. Even from a distance, I could hear the shrillness in her voice. Karen was furious. Her arms flailed wildly as she stomped toward my driveway, her face redder than sunburn. She spun in circles, looking around like she expected her car to materialize out of thin air. Then she spotted me. "You!" she shrieked, jabbing her finger in my direction. I took a slow sip of my coffee before responding. "Me?" "Where's my car?" she demanded, her voice dripping with entitlement. I set my mug down carefully, savoring the moment. "Oh, your car?" "It got towed." For a second, she just stared at me, blinking as if she couldn't quite process what I had just said. Then, all at once, she exploded. "You had NO, right?" she screeched, throwing her hands in the air. "This is harassment. I'm calling the police." I leaned back in my chair, completely unbothered. "Go ahead. I'll wait." And that's exactly what I did. When the patrol car pulled up 20 minutes later, Karen practically launched herself at the officers, waving her arms like a lunatic. "That man," she screeched, pointing at me like I was a wanted fugitive. "He had my car towed for no reason. He's been harassing me. I demand you arrest him." The officers exchanged a look, already seeming exasperated. One of them turned to me. "Sir, is this true?" I stood up and calmly shook my head. "Not even a little bit," I said. "She's been parking in my driveway for weeks. I've warned her multiple times, left notes, and told her directly. When she ignored me, I called a tow truck. I have photos, videos, and a copy of the tow receipt if you need proof." Karen's face twisted into something almost inhuman. "He's lying," she shrieked. "It's just a driveway. You can't tow someone for parking in it." The officer held up a hand, silencing her. "Ma'am, a private driveway is private property. If you were parked there without permission, he was well within his rights to have your car towed." Karen gasped as if she had just been slapped. "But I live here," she argued, grasping at straws. "I'm part of this neighborhood. He's being unreasonable." The second officer sighed. "Do you have any proof that you were allowed to park there?" Karen opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. The officer nodded. That's what I thought. Karen's face turned an even deeper shade of red, her lips trembling with rage. But she had lost, and she knew it. This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. The officer continued. You'll need to pay the impound fees to retrieve your car, and I strongly suggest you stop parking in his driveway. For a moment, I thought she might actually explode. Her fists clenched at her sides, her whole body shaking. Then, finally, she let out an incoherent scream, turned on her heel, and stormed off. And just like that, the show was over. I glanced around the neighborhood, realizing that a few of my neighbors had gathered to watch the spectacle. Some stood on their porches. Others peeked through their blinds. And all of them were smiling. For about a week, I thought that was the end of it. Karen's car was nowhere to be seen. I could finally come and go as I pleased without the constant irritation of finding my driveway occupied. But Karen wasn't done yet. One morning, I found a letter taped to my front door. It was handwritten in what I could only describe as aggressive cursive. Dear neighbor, you have made things very difficult for me with your selfish and petty actions. I have spoken to other neighbors, and we all agree that you are creating unnecessary conflict by refusing to share your driveway. As a member of this community, I expect you to be more accommodating. If you do not cooperate, I will have no choice but to escalate this matter. Sincerely, Karen. I stared at the letter for a long moment before laughing out loud. Karen thought she had rallied the neighborhood against me? That was rich. Just to be sure, I decided to do a little investigating of my own. That evening, I went door to door, chatting with a few neighbors. Oh, yeah. She came by last week. One neighbor told me, rolling their eyes, kept ranting about how unfair you were being. But honestly, we don't blame you. She's parked in our driveway before, too. Another neighbor chimed in. She tried to get me to sign some petition against you. I told her no and shut the door in her face. By the time I got back home, I had a pretty clear picture of what had happened. Karen's army didn't exist. If anything, she was on thin ice with the entire neighborhood. The next weekend, I stepped outside and stopped dead in my tracks. Karen had lost it. She had dragged 2 bright orange traffic cones into my driveway. Between them stood a cheap plastic no parking sign, one of those flimsy ones you see in supermarket parking lots. Taped to the sign was another handwritten note. This driveway is now reserved for community use. Violators will be reported. I blinked. Then I laughed. Oh, this was hilarious. I grabbed my phone, snapped a few photos, and sent them to my wife. She's actually insane. My wife texted back. Call the police again. Instead, I calmly walked over, picked up the cones, and tossed them onto Karen's lawn. Then I took down the sign and ripped it in half. No confrontation. No drama. Just reality smacking Karen in the face. The next afternoon, I installed a security camera facing my driveway. Nothing fancy, just a simple motion-activated one. I also posted a new sign. Private driveway. No parking. Violators will be towed. And just in case, I called the tow company again. If she parks there again, give us a call. We'll be ready, they assured me. Sure enough, it didn't take long. The security camera alerted me, and there she was, Karen, pulling into my driveway like she owned the place. I didn't even bother going outside. I just made the call. 30 minutes later, the tow truck arrived, and Karen's car was gone again. This time, when she came storming down the street, I didn't even engage. Keep it up, Karen, I told her, and I'll file a formal complaint for harassment. That was the last time she ever parked in my driveway. For the first time in weeks, I finally felt a sense of peace. Karen's second towing had hit her like a wrecking ball. This time, she didn't come marching down the street with fire in her eyes, screaming at me like a banshee. No, this time, she stayed inside her house. The silence was almost eerie. I half expected her to plot some other ridiculous retaliation. But for the first time since this entire saga began, she seemed to accept that she had lost. Or so I thought. One evening, my next-door neighbor, Sarah, knocked on my door. She had that look. You know, the one someone has when they've just heard the juiciest piece of gossip and can't wait to spill it. "You are not going to believe what Karen is telling people," she said, shaking her head. I raised an eyebrow. "Do I even want to know?" Sarah laughed. "She's telling everyone that you're an aggressive, controlling neighbor who abuses his power. She's claiming you're some kind of bully who had her car towed for no reason." I sighed, rubbing my temples. Of course, she was trying to rewrite history. "Is anyone actually believing her?" I asked. Sarah grinned. "Not a single person." Apparently, Karen's reputation had already been on thin ice. My situation with her was just the final push that made everyone realize what they had been dealing with. One of the other neighbors even started calling my driveway the Karen zone as a joke. It turned out that I wasn't the only one Karen had annoyed over the years. She had a history of parking in other people's driveways, complaining about loud kids playing outside, and even tried to report a neighbor's backyard decorations to the HOA, despite there being no HOA in our neighborhood. The best part? The neighborhood gossip spread like wildfire. Soon, even people from a few streets over had heard about the saga. Karen's desperate attempt to play the victim had completely backfired. She had become a walking joke. Once the neighbors turned against her, Karen's behavior changed. Before, she used to strut around the neighborhood like she owned the place, marching down the sidewalks, waving to people she didn't actually like, and making a big show of her self-importance. But now, she avoided eye contact with everyone. It was subtle at first. She stopped making small talk with the elderly couple down the street. She quit waving at the woman who jogged past her house every morning. Then, the real isolation started. At neighborhood gatherings, she sat alone. People who used to tolerate her now conveniently forgot to invite her to backyard barbecues. She became invisible. I even heard from Sarah that Karen had tried to start casual conversations with some of the other neighbors, but no one wanted to hear what she had to say anymore. The social shift was brutal. Her usual air of smug entitlement had been replaced with something desperate. She was no longer the self-proclaimed queen of the block. She was an outcast. Just when I thought Karen had finally learned her lesson, she did something so ridiculous, so Karen-like, that I couldn't help but be impressed by her persistence. She tried to invent an HOA. One morning, I stepped outside to grab my mail and noticed a new flyer tucked under my windshield wiper. Official notice. Due to recent complaints, we are introducing a new community parking regulation. Starting next month, and used driveways will be made available for shared neighborhood use. Failure to comply may result in fines or further action. The HOA Parking Committee. I blinked, then I laughed out loud. We didn't even have an HOA. And the so-called parking committee? Yeah, that didn't exist either. I grabbed the paper and walked straight across the street to Karen's house. She answered the door looking smug, as if she had just outmaneuvered me in some high-stakes political game. "I see you got the notice," she said, arms crossed. I held up the flyer. "Karen, we don't have an HOA." She didn't even flinch. "Well, maybe it's time we started one. Clearly, you don't understand how communities work." I let out a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. "Karen, if you try to enforce fake rules in a non-existent HOA, I will personally report you for fraud." For a split second, I saw her confidence falter. Then, with an exaggerated eye roll, she slammed the door in my face. Needless to say, her HOA fantasy died that day. I thought that was the last of it. But Karen had one more trick up her sleeve. About a week later, I got an unexpected knock on my door. It was a city code enforcement officer. "Sir, we received an anonymous complaint about an illegally parked vehicle in your driveway," he said, checking his clipboard. I blinked. An illegally parked vehicle? In my own driveway? It didn't take a genius to figure out who had filed a complaint. I motioned for the officer to follow me to my driveway. "You mean my own car?" I asked, pointing to the very obvious fact that there was no illegal parking happening here. The officer sighed, clearly realizing what was going on. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "we get these kind of calls sometimes. It's obviously a false report. I'm going to close the case, But if this keeps happening, you might want to consider filing a harassment complaint. I shook my head, suppressing a laugh. Karen was really grasping at straws now. As the officer walked away, I looked over at Karen's house. The blinds on her window shifted. She had been watching, and she knew this was her last failed move. After that day, Karen finally did what I'd been waiting for her to do all along. She gave up. No more parking in my driveway. No more fake HOA notices. No more ridiculous complaints. She had finally accepted defeat. The neighborhood continued on without her, and her reputation never recovered. Every now and then, I'd see her walking past my house. Her head would be down, her pace quick. Sometimes, just for fun, I'd give her a little wave. She never waved back. And me? Well, I finally got my driveway back. No more battles. No more entitled nonsense. Just peace. But the best part? The tow truck driver and I were now on a first-name basis, just in case.